The day I discovered ballot papers hidden in the trash compactor behind our community clubhouse in Scottsdale, Arizona. I realized my suspicions about our HOA board weren't just paranoia. My hands shook as I photographed the crumpled votes, each one marked for candidates who weren't board President Patricia Henderson and her chosen cronies. That moment in March 2014 changed everything about how I viewed Saguaro Springs, the planned community my wife Rachel and I had moved into just 2 years earlier. I'm Daniel Martinez, and I bought into the American dream in 2012 when we purchased our 4-bedroom home in this gated community of 300 families. Rachel loved the desert landscaping and the promise of community pools and tennis courts. I appreciated the property values and the supposedly democratic governance structure. We were 32 years old, newly married, and optimistic about building our future here. The HOA seemed like a minor administrative detail, not the nightmare that would consume the next decade of my life. Patricia Henderson had been board president since 2008, according to the community records. She was 53, with severely highlighted blonde hair styled in that particular way that seemed designed to demand speaking to managers. Her usual uniform consisted of designer athletic, where despite never setting foot in the community gym, oversized sunglasses, and an expression of perpetual disapproval. Within months of moving in, I noticed something odd about how board elections worked in Saguaro Springs. The first red flag appeared in October 2012 during our annual meeting. Rachel and I attended out of civic duty, sitting in the back of the packed clubhouse as Patricia presided over the proceedings with an iron fist. When nominations opened for 3 vacant board positions, several residents stood to volunteer. Mark Chen, a software engineer who lived 2 streets over, nominated himself and spoke passionately about bringing transparency to HOA finances. Patricia's smile never wavered, but her eyes turned cold. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "All ballots will be mailed next week, and we'll announce results at our November meeting." The process seemed straightforward enough. We received our ballot in the mail, marked our choices, and returned it in the provided envelope. Mark Chen had impressed me with his ideas about publishing detailed quarterly financial reports, so I voted for him along with 2 other reform-minded candidates. November's meeting arrived, and Patricia announced the results with the same frozen smile. "Your board members for the next 2 years are Deborah Walsh, Gordon Steele, and myself continuing as president," she declared. Mark Chen had apparently received only 23 votes out of nearly 200 cast. The reform candidates had been crushed across the board. Mark stood up immediately, his face flushed. "I'd like to request a recount. I spoke with dozens of neighbors who said they voted for me. The election committee has certified these results," Patricia replied smoothly. "We don't conduct recounts without evidence of irregularities. Do you have any evidence, Mark?" He didn't, of course. Just the word of neighbors and his own gut feeling that something wasn't right. Patricia moved swiftly to the next agenda item, and that was that. Mark stopped attending meetings after that night, and I watched a good man's civic engagement die in real time. I might have forgotten about it too, dismissed it as sour grapes from a losing candidate, except the same thing happened again in 2013. This time, a retired accountant named Susan Moore ran on a platform of conducting a full audit of HOA finances. She had credentials, experience, and a friendly demeanor that appealed to older residents. She also claimed to have widespread support. The results showed Patricia's hand-picked slate winning by landslides again. Susan Moore allegedly received 31 votes. I started asking questions at the post-election meeting. "Who counts the ballots?" I asked when public comment opened. Patricia looked at me like I'd asked what color the sky was. The election committee, of course. Myself, Deborah Walsh, and Gordon Steele, we've been doing this for years. Shouldn't the counting be done by neutral parties, people who aren't running in the election? Her smile tightened. Are you accusing us of impropriety, Mr. Martinez? I'm suggesting best practices for election integrity, I said, keeping my voice level. In most organizations, candidates don't count their own ballots. This is how we've always done it at Saguaro Springs, she said. If you have concerns, you're welcome to volunteer for the election committee yourself. I took her up on that offer in January 2014. I submitted my name to join the election committee, along with 2 other residents who'd expressed similar concerns about transparency. Patricia accepted my application with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and scheduled me for committee duties. My first meeting with the election committee happened in February 2014 in Patricia's home, a sprawling 5-bedroom house with a pristine front yard and backyard pool. She welcomed me warmly, offered coffee, and introduced me to the process. Deborah Walsh and Gordon Steele were also present, both longtime board members who seemed to treat Patricia with deference bordering on worship. We take election security very seriously, Patricia explained, showing me file boxes of past ballots. All returned ballots are stored here in my home office until counting day. I have a locked filing cabinet specifically for this purpose. Why not store them at the clubhouse? I asked. Security concerns, she replied. The clubhouse is accessed by maintenance staff, cleaning crews, various committees. Here, I can personally ensure nothing happens to them. It seemed reasonable on the surface, but something felt wrong about hundreds of ballots sitting in Patricia's personal possession for weeks before counting. I made a note to pay close attention during the actual vote tallying process. The 2014 election season brought renewed energy to reform-minded residents. A woman named Jennifer Yates announced her candidacy in August, and she was sharp. She'd been a city councilwoman in Oregon before retiring to Arizona, and she knew how to campaign. She knocked on doors, hosted meet-and-greet events at her home, and built a genuine grassroots coalition. I volunteered for her campaign, helping distribute flyers and talking to neighbors. We need oversight of HOA spending, Jennifer told a group of about 30 residents gathered in her living room one September evening. Last year, we paid $200,000 for pool maintenance. I called around to commercial pool companies, and they quoted me half that amount for the same services. Where's the extra $100,000 going? Rachel squeezed my hand as residents murmured in agreement. This was the kind of leadership Saguaro Springs needed. Jennifer had 3 other candidates running alongside her, all committed to financial transparency and democratic reforms. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about our community's direction. Ballots went out in late October. I monitored the process carefully, watching as Patricia and Gordon stuffed envelopes at the clubhouse. Everything seemed proper. Residents had until November 10th to return their ballots to the locked drop box installed at the clubhouse entrance. On November 11th, Patricia called the election committee together for the count. I arrived at the clubhouse at 9 in the morning, ready to observe every step. Patricia greeted me cordially and led me to a back office where Deborah and Gordon were already waiting. Daniel, thank you for being here, Patricia said. We'll collect the ballots from the drop box first, then retrieve the mailed returns from my home. The mailed returns? I asked. I thought all ballots came through the drop box. Some residents prefer to mail them directly to my home address, she explained. It's printed as an option on the ballot instructions. This was news to me. I pulled out my phone and photographed the ballot instructions, which did indeed list Patricia's home address as an alternative return location. It seemed like a massive conflict of interest, but technically it was in the rules. We collected the drop box first, It contained 87 ballots. For a community of 300 homes, that seemed low. Patricia seemed unconcerned. "We'll get more from the mail-in votes," she assured me. We drove in separate cars to Patricia's house. She disappeared into her home office and emerged carrying 2 large boxes. "Here we are, the rest of our ballots." We returned to the clubhouse and began the counting process at a long table in the conference room. Patricia opened envelopes while Deborah marked tallies on a sheet. Gordon operated as recorder, writing down the names on each ballot. I was positioned as an observer, watching but not handling ballots myself. The first few were a mix of candidates. Jennifer Yates's name appeared frequently, along with her slate of reformers. Then something strange happened. Patricia opened a cluster of about 15 envelopes in a row, and every single one was marked for her and her chosen candidates. Not a single vote for Jennifer or anyone else. "Interesting," I said. "That's quite a streak. People know quality leadership when they see it," Patricia replied without looking up. The pattern continued. Votes would be mixed for a while, then suddenly a long run of ballots all marked identically for Patricia's slate. It seemed statistically improbable, but I couldn't prove anything by watching. The handwriting on the ballots varied. The envelopes looked legitimate. Still, my instincts screamed that something was wrong. By the time we finished counting, Patricia's slate had won again. Jennifer Yates had allegedly received 93 votes out of 267 cast, not even close to the support she seemed to have based on her campaign events. "Thank you all for your service," Patricia said, locking the ballots back into boxes. "I'll file these with the previous year's records." I left the clubhouse feeling frustrated and confused. I'd watched the entire process and hadn't seen any obvious cheating, yet the results didn't match reality as I understood it. That evening, I told Rachel about my concerns. "Maybe Jennifer's support wasn't as strong as it seemed," she suggested. "People at campaign events are the true believers. Silent majority might have voted differently." "Maybe," I said, unconvinced, "but I'm going to keep watching." The trash compactor discovery came 4 months later in March 2015. I'd started walking our dog Max around the clubhouse area regularly, partly for exercise and partly because I'd become hyper-aware of anything involving HOA operations. The commercial trash compactor behind the building was usually locked, but that Tuesday morning I found it standing open. Maintenance must have been emptying it and left it accessible. Max pulled toward some interesting smell near the compactor, and I glanced inside out of idle curiosity. That's when I saw them, dozens of papers with the distinctive blue border of our HOA ballots, crumpled and mixed in with regular trash. My heart started racing. I pulled out my phone and photographed everything from multiple angles. Then I reached in, not caring about the garbage smell, and pulled out several of the discarded ballots. They were from the 2014 election, each one marked for Jennifer Yates and her reform slate. I found at least 40 ballots in that compactor, every single one voting against Patricia. My hands shook as I documented everything. This was evidence, real, tangible evidence of election fraud. These votes had never been counted, they'd been thrown away. I carefully extracted all the ballots I could find and placed them in a plastic bag I pulled from the dispenser near the dog park. Then I went home and spread them across my dining room table. Rachel stared at them in shock. "She threw away votes," Rachel whispered. "Patricia actually threw away votes." "We need to report this," I said. "Police, State Attorney General." "We need more evidence," Rachel countered. "This is from months ago. We need to prove this is a pattern, not a one-time thing." She was right, and I hated it. Going to authorities with a bag of ballots from a dumpster wouldn't be enough. Patricia could claim she was discarding duplicates or damaged ballots. She could say anything. I needed to prove systematic fraud, which meant watching and documenting over time. That realization was crushing. It meant letting this corruption continue, at least temporarily. It also meant I was committing to something that would consume my life for years. Rachel saw my expression and took my hand. "We'll do this together," she said, "but we do it carefully and thoroughly." We build an ironclad case. Over the next several months, I became obsessed with understanding how Patricia's system worked. I reviewed old meeting minutes and election results going back to 2008, when she first became president. The pattern was clear once you looked for it. Every single election during her tenure had resulted in victories for her handpicked candidates. Not once had an opposition candidate won a board seat. I created spreadsheets tracking reported voter turnout, vote margins, and community demographics. Turnout numbers fluctuated strangely, sometimes high and sometimes surprisingly low, with no clear correlation to controversy or resident engagement. Vote margins for Patricia's slate ranged from comfortable to landslide, regardless of how energetic the opposition campaign had been. I also started documenting everything about the election process itself. I photographed the ballot drop box regularly, noting when it appeared full versus empty. I tracked when Patricia collected ballots and when counting occurred. I kept detailed notes on every election committee meeting. The 2015 election season began in August with candidate nominations. This time, a man named Robert Davidson threw his hat in the ring. Robert was a practicing attorney who'd recently moved to Saguaro Springs, and he immediately recognized the governance problems. He requested copies of financial records, which Patricia provided reluctantly and only after multiple reminders. "Your reserve fund is severely underfunded," Robert announced at a September meeting, holding up printed spreadsheets. "According to your own financial statements, we should have $1.2 million in reserves for long-term maintenance. We have $300,000. Where did the money go?" Patricia's face remained composed, but I saw her jaw tighten. "The board has made strategic decisions about fund allocation. We've prioritized current resident needs over excessive reserve stockpiling." "Reserves aren't excessive," Robert shot back. "They're essential. When the community roads need repaving or the pool requires major repairs, where will that money come from?" "Special assessments if necessary," Patricia said coolly. "This community trusts the board to make sound financial decisions." Robert's campaign gained momentum quickly. He was articulate, knowledgeable, and didn't back down from confrontation. He also made a crucial decision that impressed me. He announced he was recording all his interactions with the HOA board. "Arizona is a one-party consent state," he explained at a campaign meeting in his backyard. "I'm documenting everything to protect myself and to ensure transparency." The recording idea sparked something in my mind. If Robert could record to protect himself, I could record to document fraud. I started carrying a small digital audio recorder to all HOA events. I also purchased a higher quality camera for photographing documents and ballots. October brought the ballot distribution. I watched like a hawk as Patricia and Gordon prepared the mailings. This year, I made a point of talking to neighbors about the voting process. "When you get your ballot, mark it immediately and put it in the drop box," I told everyone who would listen. "Don't mail it to Patricia's house. Use the drop box at the clubhouse." Some people looked at me strangely, but others nodded with understanding. Word was spreading about election concerns, and Robert's campaign had raised awareness about board accountability. I also did something potentially crazy. I recruited 15 trusted neighbors and asked them to do me a favor, photograph their marked ballots before sealing them in envelopes. I explained my concerns carefully, showing them the discarded ballots I'd found in the compactor. "I need to be able to prove how people voted if ballots go missing," I explained. "I'm not asking you to tell me who you're voting for. Just photograph your ballot and keep the image. If the election results seem wrong, we can compare." 12 of the 15 agreed. It wasn't a scientific sample, but it was something. A way to verify whether reported results matched actual votes. November counting day arrived, and I showed up early with my recorder running in my pocket. Patricia greeted me with a smile that looked more forced than usual. "Daniel, good to see you." "Ready to observe democracy in action." "Always," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The counting process followed the same pattern as 2014. Dropbox ballots first, then Patricia's mysterious cache of mail-in votes. This year, the Dropbox contained 103 ballots. Patricia's boxes held another 189, which seemed like an implausibly high number of people choosing to mail ballots to her home. As we counted, I watched carefully. Patricia's handling of envelopes was smooth and practiced, but I noticed something odd. Sometimes she would pull a ballot from an envelope, glance at it, and set it aside on a separate stack. "What are those?" I asked, pointing to the separated ballots. "Damaged or unclear ballots," she said. "We review them at the end to determine voter intent." "Can I see them?" "After we finish the main count." The main count proceeded with the same suspicious pattern of clusters. Long runs of ballots all marked identically for Patricia's slate, broken up by stretches of mixed votes. When we finished, the tally showed Patricia winning again. Robert Davidson had allegedly received 107 votes, losing by a margin of nearly 2-1. "Now can I see the damaged ballots?" I asked. Patricia pulled out the separate stack. There were 23 ballots, and I felt rage building as I looked through them. These weren't damaged. They were clearly marked for Robert Davidson and other reform candidates. Patricia had separated them deliberately to exclude them from the count. "These look fine to me," I said, holding up a ballot marked clearly for Robert. "The voter used a red pen instead of blue or black," Patricia said. "That violates ballot instructions. It's completely legible. The voter's intent is crystal clear." "Rules are rules, Daniel," she replied, her voice hardening. "We can't make exceptions just because someone can't follow simple directions." I photographed each of those excluded ballots. Patricia didn't stop me, probably because she thought she was on solid legal ground with technicalities. But I knew what I was witnessing. She was manufacturing reasons to throw out opposition votes. After the meeting, I called Robert Davidson and told him what I'd seen. He listened grimly. "Can you prove she's manipulating results?" he asked. "I'm working on it," I said. "But I need more time and more evidence." "Keep at it," he said. "Someone needs to hold them accountable." Over the next year, I expanded my documentation efforts. I filed public records requests for all financial documents, forcing Patricia to produce contracts and expenditures. I discovered the pool maintenance contract was held by a company called Aquatic Services, whose registered agent was Patricia's brother-in-law. The landscaping contract went to a company owned by Gordon Steele's cousin. This was clear self-dealing, probably illegal under Arizona HOA law. I compiled everything into organized files, building a case brick by brick. Rachel supported me even as the project consumed more of my time and energy. I spent evenings reviewing documents and weekends talking to neighbors about their experiences with the board. In early 2016, I made contact with an investigative reporter named Amanda Chen from the Arizona Republic. I sent her a detailed email outlining my findings about election irregularities and financial self-dealing. She responded within 2 days. "I'm interested," her email said. "But I need hard proof of fraud. Documentation is good, but I need smoking gun evidence that will hold up to scrutiny." I met Amanda at a coffee shop in Phoenix, bringing copies of everything I'd compiled. She was in her 40s, sharply dressed, with the skeptical demeanor of someone who'd been lied to professionally for decades. "Walk me through this," she said, opening her laptop. I explained the whole story, from the discarded ballots in 2015 to the excluded votes in 2016, to the financial conflicts of interest. Amanda took notes and asked probing questions. "The problem is proving fraud beyond reasonable doubt," she said after I finished. "The discarded ballots are circumstantial. She could say she was disposing of test ballots or extras. The excluded votes are sketchy but technically defensible if ballot instructions specify pen color. The financial conflicts might violate HOA bylaws but aren't necessarily criminal." "So what do I need?" I asked, frustrated. "You need to catch her in the act," Amanda said bluntly. "You need video or audio of her explicitly discussing how she rigs elections. Or you need access to real ballots before she manipulates them to prove the count doesn't match the votes." That conversation crystallized what I had to do. I needed to infiltrate the election process more deeply. I needed to be present when Patricia was alone with ballots, and I needed to document what she did with them. The 2016 election approached. This time, a woman named Michelle Torres announced her candidacy. Michelle was a high school principal, well-respected and organized. She ran a professional campaign with printed materials and a detailed platform focused on financial accountability and democratic governance. I met with Michelle privately and explained what I was doing. I showed her the evidence I'd compiled and told her my suspicions about ballot manipulation. "Are you willing to help me document the process?" I asked. "I want to mark ballots in a way that we can track them." "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "I want to put a nearly invisible mark on ballots going to specific addresses," I explained. "A tiny pencil dot in the corner, something Patricia wouldn't notice. Then, if those ballots don't appear in the count, or if they're reported as voting differently than the resident claims, we'll have proof." Michelle considered this carefully. "That's risky. If she catches you tampering with ballots, she could press charges." "I know," I said, "but I don't see another way to prove what she's doing." "Let me think about it," Michelle said. She called me back 2 days later. "I'm in, but we have to be incredibly careful." I recruited 3 other trusted residents to help. We identified 30 households we knew personally, residents who were definitely voting for Michelle and reform candidates. When ballots were distributed in October, we met one evening at my house to plan. "I work in the clubhouse 2 mornings a week," said Gary Chen, one of my recruits. "I can get access to Patricia's office when she's not there. We need to mark ballots before they're mailed," I said. "Once they're distributed, it's too late." "She stores blank ballots in her office filing cabinet," Gary said. "I've seen them when she leaves the cabinet unlocked." This was the break we needed. The following Tuesday, Gary went to the clubhouse during his regular volunteer shift. Patricia was there initially but left around 10 to run errands. Gary texted me, "Clear for 30 minutes." I drove to the clubhouse immediately. Gary let me into Patricia's office, keeping watch by the door. The filing cabinet was indeed unlocked, and I found boxes of blank ballots waiting to be stuffed into envelopes. My hands trembled as I pulled out exactly 30 ballots and made a tiny mark with a mechanical pencil in the bottom right corner, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I photographed each marked ballot with a ruler showing the mark location. Then I carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it. "Done," I whispered to Gary. We locked up and left separately. Over the next week, Patricia and her team distributed ballots. I monitored the mail and confirmed that households on our list received ballots with my marks. I took photos of each mark, building a comprehensive record. Now came the crucial part. I contacted each of the 30 households and asked them to photograph their completed ballot before sealing it. All 30 agreed and sent me images showing they'd voted for Michelle Torres and reform candidates. I had 30 marked ballots, all voting for the opposition. If Patricia's count showed those ballots voting differently, or if they didn't appear in the count at all, I'd have definitive proof of fraud. November counting day was tense. I arrived at the clubhouse with my recorder running and camera ready. Patricia seemed more guarded than usual, perhaps sensing something was different this year. "Just the usual process," she said as we began. "Nothing special today." We counted the Dropbox ballots first. I watched carefully and to my surprise, several of my marked ballots appeared. Patricia counted them accurately, marking them for Michelle Torres without any apparent manipulation. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the fraud happened differently than I thought. Then we got to Patricia's boxes of mail-in votes. She opened envelopes with her usual practiced efficiency. About halfway through her stack, I saw it. One of my marked ballots emerged from an envelope. Patricia glanced at it, saw it was marked for Michelle, and smoothly set it aside on her damaged ballot pile. "Wait," I said. "What was wrong with that one?" "Stray mark in the corner," she said without hesitation. "Could indicate tampering." My heart pounded. She'd noticed my marking technique. I stayed quiet, watching carefully. Over the next hour, 17 more of my marked ballots appeared. Patricia sorted them all to the damaged pile, claiming various technical violations. When we finished the main count, Michelle Torres was losing badly. Patricia's slate had allegedly won by a huge margin. But I knew the truth. 18 ballots voting for Michelle had been excluded on bogus technicalities. "Let's review the damaged ballots," I said during the final tally. "I don't think that's necessary," Patricia replied. "We've been through this before, Daniel. Damaged ballots don't count." "I'm invoking my right as an election committee member to review all excluded ballots before certification," I said, pulling out my phone to record video. "I want each one examined individually." Patricia's expression hardened, but she couldn't refuse without making it obvious she was hiding something. We went through each excluded ballot. I photographed every single one, documenting the ridiculous reasons Patricia gave for exclusion. Stray mark in the corner, using a gel pen instead of ballpoint, check mark instead of X. Unclear voter intent. The excuses were transparently false, and I was getting everything on video and audio. When we finished, I had documented 18 ballots improperly excluded, all voting for Michelle. But I had 12 more marked ballots unaccounted for. What happened to those? After the meeting, I went back to my car and reviewed my photographs and recordings. Then I did something bold. I returned to the clubhouse and waited outside until Patricia left for the evening. She carried several boxes to her car, presumably the counted ballots she was taking home for storage. I followed her at a distance, watching as she drove not to her house but to a different location, a self-storage facility called Secure Space on Scottsdale Road. She pulled up to a unit, unlocked it, and carried the boxes inside. This was new information. Patricia was storing ballots off-site, not in her home as she'd claimed. Why? What else was in that storage unit? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that storage unit. It represented something bigger than this single election. If Patricia was hiding ballots there, what else might be stored? Old ballots from previous years, financial records, evidence of the full scope of her fraud. I knew breaking into the storage unit would be illegal and inadmissible as evidence, but I needed to know what was there. I spent a week wrestling with my conscience before deciding on a compromise approach. I filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Attorney General's office in December 2016, submitting a detailed report of everything I'd documented. I included the discarded ballots from 2015, photographs of the improperly excluded ballots from 2016, financial documents showing self-dealing, audio recordings of Patricia's dubious explanations, and my marked ballot evidence proving votes weren't counted accurately. The complaint was 47 pages long with 212 exhibits. I sent it via certified mail and waited. 2 weeks later, I received a response from an assistant attorney general named David Reyes. His letter acknowledged receipt of my complaint and stated the office was reviewing the matter. It provided no timeline or indication of what action might be taken. Months passed with no further communication. I followed up in March 2017 with additional documentation. No response. I called the office in May and was told my case was still under review. By July, I was convinced nothing would happen. Then, in August 2017, I received a phone call from David Reyes himself. Mr. Martinez, I'm calling about your HOA complaint. Can you meet with me this week? We met at a government office building in Phoenix. David Reyes was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He had a conference room table covered with my submitted documents. I've reviewed your evidence, he said without preamble. It's compelling but not quite sufficient for criminal charges. The marked ballot evidence is particularly problematic because it could be argued you tampered with the election. I marked blank ballots before distribution to track them, I protested. That's not tampering. I understand your intent, David said, but a defense attorney would argue you altered official election materials. However, the financial self-dealing is clear and the pattern of election irregularities is suspicious. I need more evidence of explicit fraud. What would constitute enough evidence? I asked. Direct testimony from someone involved in the fraud, video or audio of Patricia explicitly discussing vote manipulation. Access to the storage unit where you say she's keeping ballots. Something definitive. Can you get a warrant for the storage unit? Not yet. I need probable cause for a warrant, and what you've given me doesn't quite meet that threshold. Keep documenting. If she does this again in 2017 and you can prove it more definitively, we'll have a case. I left that meeting energized despite the disappointment. The Attorney General's office was taking this seriously. I just needed more evidence. The 2017 election season began with renewed determination. This time, two strong candidates emerged: Frank Morrison, a retired police officer, and Linda Huang, a CPA. They ran together on a reform platform and conducted an aggressive campaign. I met with both of them and explained the situation, including my contact with the Attorney General's office. Frank's law enforcement background made him immediately understand the evidence needs. We need to catch her red-handed, he said. I still have contacts in the Scottsdale Police Department. Let me make some calls. Frank connected me with a detective named Sarah Brennan who worked in the fraud division. She met with me unofficially at a restaurant, listening to my story. This is an interesting case, she said. HOA fraud falls into a gray area. It's not exactly my jurisdiction, but if you can prove criminal activity, I can help. The Attorney General's office would be the lead on this, but local police can assist with investigation. What can I do? I asked. Keep documenting. If you can get video evidence of her manipulating ballots, actual footage of her throwing away votes or changing ballots, that would be prosecution-worthy. That conversation planted an idea. What if I could get inside Patricia's house during the ballot storage period? I dismissed it immediately as too risky and probably illegal, but the idea kept nagging at me. Rachel and I discussed it over dinner one night. You cannot break into her house, Rachel said firmly. That's a line we're not crossing. You could go to jail and all your evidence would be tainted. What if someone invited me in legitimately? I asked. Who's going to do that? Patricia hates you. I thought about it for several days before the answer came to me. Patricia's daughter, Melissa, was in her early 20s and often helped her mother with HOA tasks. I'd seen her at community events, and we'd chatted casually a few times. More importantly, Melissa had recently started dating a guy named Josh who lived in Saguaro Springs, and Josh was friendly with one of my neighbors. Through careful social networking, I arranged to be invited to a small gathering at Josh's house in October 2017. Melissa was there, and I made a point of chatting with her about innocuous topics. She was pleasant and seemed much more reasonable than her mother. "Your mom works so hard for the community," I said at one point. "Managing all those elections and finances must be exhausting." "It's a lot," Melissa agreed. "She basically runs everything from her home office. Sometimes I help her stuff envelopes or organize files." "That's nice of you." "Must be interesting seeing how it all works behind the scenes." We talked for a while longer, and I planted seeds carefully. Over the next few weeks, I ran into Melissa several more times at community events and coffee shops, always friendly and casual. I never pushed about HOA business, just built rapport. In late October, the opportunity I'd been waiting for arrived. Melissa posted on Facebook that she was organizing her mother's home office and joked about drowning in paperwork. I sent her a friendly message. "Ha, I know that feeling. I'm pretty good at organizing systems if you need an extra pair of hands. Used to do project management before switching careers." To my surprise, she responded positively. "That would actually be amazing. Mom has files everywhere and I have no idea what system she uses. Tomorrow afternoon." I could barely believe it. I was going to get legitimate access to Patricia's home office where the ballots were stored. I told Rachel, who looked worried. "Please be careful," she said. "Don't do anything that could be considered illegal." "I'm just helping organize files," I said. "If I happen to see ballots lying around, I'm allowed to observe." The next day, I arrived at Patricia's house with my phone fully charged and recording app ready. Melissa let me in, and Patricia was away at a doctor's appointment. "She'll be back in 2 hours," Melissa said. "Let's see if we can make a dent in this chaos." Patricia's home office was indeed chaotic, with stacks of papers covering every surface. I also immediately spotted the file boxes labeled HOA Ballots 2017 sitting on a side table, some with lids off and ballots visible inside. "Where should we start?" I asked Melissa. "Maybe group things by category. Financial documents, election stuff, architectural applications." We worked for about 30 minutes, and I gradually maneuvered us toward the table with ballot boxes. I needed to see inside those boxes without making it obvious I was snooping. "Should we organize the ballot boxes?" I suggested. "Get them properly labeled and stored." "Sure," Melissa said. "I think Mom keeps those locked up usually, but she's been working with them this week for the upcoming count." I carefully opened one of the boxes, pretending to check the label. Inside were hundreds of returned ballots still in their envelopes. But I also saw something else, a separate stack of ballots that had been removed from envelopes and sorted into 2 piles. My pulse quickened. One pile appeared to be ballots marked for Patricia's slate. The other pile were ballots for Frank Morrison and Linda Huang. Why would she sort them before the official count? I pretended to organize the box while discreetly photographing the contents with my phone. I got clear images of the sorted ballots, showing they'd been pre-counted and separated by voting preference. "This box seems organized already," I said casually. "Let's work on the financial files." We spent another hour organizing other documents. I photographed several questionable financial records while we worked, including contracts with Patricia's relatives and suspicious expense reports. Melissa chatted the whole time, oblivious to what I was documenting. Patricia returned home just as we were finishing. Her expression when she saw me in her office was priceless, shock followed immediately by barely concealed rage. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. "I invited him to help organize," Melissa said cheerfully. "He's got great ideas for filing systems." "How thoughtful," Patricia said, her eyes locked on mine. "But I think we've imposed enough on Mr. Martinez's time." "Happy to help," I said, gathering my things. "Nice seeing you, Patricia." I left quickly, my heart pounding. I'd gotten photographs of ballots pre-sorted before the official count. It wasn't smoking gun evidence yet, but it was another piece of the puzzle. The official count happened 2 days later. I attended with my usual recording equipment, watching carefully. Patricia seemed more guarded with me present, but she went through her normal routine. The results showed her slate winning again by comfortable margins. After the meeting, I immediately compared my photographs of the pre-sorted ballots with the official count. Something was wrong. I'd photographed 63 ballots in the opposition pile during my office visit. The official results showed Frank Morrison receiving only 49 votes total. 14 ballots had disappeared. I went back through my photographs and identified specific ballots I could recognize by envelope characteristics: stains, bent corners, distinctive handwriting. I made a list of missing ballots and began contacting voters whose envelopes I could identify. "Did you vote in the HOA election?" I asked each person. Most confirmed they had voted and that they'd voted for Frank Morrison. Their ballots simply hadn't been counted. I compiled everything into a supplemental report and sent it to David Reyes at the Attorney General's office. I also contacted Detective Sarah Brennan and shared my findings. "This is good," Sarah said after reviewing my documentation. "The pre-sorted ballots suggest premeditation. The missing ballots suggest actual vote destruction, but I still need something more direct." "Can you get video of her actually manipulating ballots?" That question haunted me. How could I possibly get video of Patricia committing fraud? She wasn't going to do it in front of me. The answer came from an unexpected source. In January 2018, Gary Chen, who'd helped me access the clubhouse office, approached me with information. "I think Patricia is planning something," he said. "She's been talking about switching to an electronic voting system. She says it's more efficient and secure." "Electronic voting," I said. "That's actually more susceptible to manipulation in a small organization like this." That's what I thought too. She's bringing a proposal to the February board meeting. I attended that meeting and listened as Patricia enthusiastically pitched an online voting system provided by a company called Elect Right Solutions. "Paper ballots are antiquated," she explained to the assembled residents. "Electronic voting is more convenient for residents and easier to tabulate. We can have results immediately after voting closes." Several residents asked good questions about security and verification. Patricia had smooth answers for everything, but I was deeply suspicious. An online system controlled by Patricia would be even easier to manipulate than paper ballots. "I'd like to see the security credentials for this company," I said during public comment. "What safeguards prevent vote manipulation?" "Elect Right is fully certified and bonded," Patricia replied. "They provide detailed security documentation, which I'm happy to share." She never shared that documentation, despite multiple requests. The board voted to approve the electronic system anyway in March 2018. I immediately researched Elect Right Solutions and discovered it was a small company based in Nevada with minimal online presence and no significant track record. I submitted a public records request for the contract with Elect Right. What I received was shocking. The contract was for $35,000 annually, an outrageous price for a 300-home community. Moreover, the company's registered agent was a man named Kevin Walsh, the same last name as board member Deborah Walsh. I investigated further and confirmed Kevin Walsh was Deborah's brother. This was another layer of self-dealing, funneling HOA money to a board member's family. I sent all of this to the Attorney General's office immediately. David Reyes called me 2 days later. "This is exactly what we needed," he said. "The electronic voting contract establishes a pattern of financial fraud. Combined with your election irregularity evidence, we have enough for a full investigation. We're opening a formal case." My heart soared. After 4 years of documentation and frustration, the state was finally acting. "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll issue subpoenas for financial records and election materials. We'll interview board members. We'll audit the HOA's books. This is going to take time, probably 6 months to a year, but we're moving forward." I hung up and immediately told Rachel. She hugged me tight, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." But I wasn't done documenting. The 2018 election cycle was approaching, and I wanted to continue gathering evidence while the investigation proceeded. The Attorney General's office encouraged this. "Keep doing what you're doing," David Reyes told me. "The more recent evidence we have, the stronger our case." This time, a candidate named Marcus Johnson emerged as the reform leader. Marcus was a civil engineer with excellent credentials and a compelling vision for financial responsibility. He'd heard about my documentation efforts and contacted me directly. "I know you've been fighting this for years," he said. "I want to help. What can I do?" I explained the situation, including the ongoing Attorney General investigation. Marcus was energized. "Let's make this election too visible for her to manipulate," he suggested. "Full transparency, video cameras at the counting, multiple observers make it impossible for her to cheat." We organized an unprecedented election oversight effort. I recruited 20 residents to serve as election observers, far more than Patricia could reasonably exclude. We announced publicly that the entire counting process would be recorded and live-streamed on social media. Patricia tried to shut this down immediately. "Recording the counting process violates voter privacy," she claimed at a September board meeting. "We're not recording individual ballots," I countered. "We're recording the process to ensure integrity. This is completely legal and appropriate." Several residents backed me up vocally, and Patricia was forced to acquiesce. The 2018 election proceeded under unprecedented scrutiny. On counting day in November, I arrived with 4 video cameras, setting them up at different angles to capture the entire process. I live-streamed everything on Facebook, narrating what was happening. Over 200 community members watched online in real time. Patricia went through the motions, but her usual tricks were impossible with so many eyes watching. She couldn't discard ballots or exclude votes without it being immediately visible. The count proceeded with painful transparency. When results were announced, Marcus Johnson had won. For the first time in a decade, an opposition candidate had actually won an HOA board seat. 2 other reform candidates also won, giving reformers a board majority. Patricia's face was ashen as she read the results. Her voice shook slightly. "Congratulations to the winners," she said mechanically. "The board will transition accordingly." The room erupted in applause. Residents stood and cheered. Rachel squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. We'd done it. Democracy had actually functioned, but the victory was bittersweet because I knew what was coming. The Attorney General investigation was proceeding, and Patricia's reckoning was approaching. In December 2018, the Attorney General's office executed subpoenas for all HOA financial records and election materials. Investigators showed up at Patricia's house with court orders, seizing boxes of documents and ballots from her home office and the storage unit. Patricia tried to claim attorney-client privilege and other protections, but the subpoenas were comprehensive. Everything was taken into state custody for analysis. Over the next 6 months, investigators conducted forensic accounting of the HOA's finances. They interviewed dozens of residents, board members, and vendors. They analyzed 10 years of election results and ballots. The scope of the investigation expanded as they uncovered more evidence. In March 2019, David Reyes contacted me for a formal interview. I spent 6 hours answering questions, walking investigators through my documentation, and explaining how Patricia's system worked. They were particularly interested in the marked ballot evidence and the photographs from Patricia's office. "Your documentation has been invaluable," David told me as we wrapped up. "Most fraud cases don't have anything close to this level of detail. You've built our case for us." "When will charges be filed?" I asked. "Soon," he said. "We're finalizing the forensic analysis." Probably 2 to 3 months. The waiting was agonizing. Marcus Johnson and the Reform Board had taken control of the HOA and immediately implemented transparency measures. They published detailed financial reports online, established independent election oversight, and terminated all contracts with board members' relatives. Patricia attended one board meeting after losing her majority, sitting stone-faced in the back row. She never spoke or participated. After that, she stopped coming to meetings entirely. In June 2019, the Arizona Attorney General's office announced criminal charges against Patricia Henderson, Deborah Walsh, and Gordon Steele. The press conference was held in Phoenix, and I attended along with Rachel and several other Saguaro Springs residents. Attorney General Mark Bjarnovich himself presented the findings. Today, we're announcing charges against 3 former HOA board members in connection with a decade-long fraud scheme. Patricia Henderson, Deborah Walsh, and Gordon Steele face multiple counts including election fraud, theft, fraudulent schemes, and criminal conflicts of interest. He outlined the charges in detail. Patricia faced 17 felony counts. The investigation had uncovered systematic election rigging from 2008 to 2018, including ballot destruction, vote manipulation, and falsified election results. The financial fraud was equally extensive. Over $400,000 in HOA funds had been funneled to companies owned by board members and their relatives through inflated contracts and fraudulent billing. This case demonstrates that HOA board members are not above the law, Bjarnovich continued. They occupy positions of trust, and when they abuse that trust, there must be consequences. I want to thank Daniel Martinez, a resident of Saguaro Springs, whose persistent documentation made this prosecution possible. Cameras turned toward me, and I felt my face flush. Rachel held my hand as reporters shouted questions. I didn't answer them, just nodded at the Attorney General and let him continue his presentation. Patricia, Deborah, and Gordon were arrested that same day. I watched news footage of Patricia being led from her home in handcuffs, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Part of me felt satisfaction, but mostly I just felt exhausted. The legal proceedings took another 2 years. Patricia hired expensive attorneys who fought every charge vigorously. They tried to suppress evidence, claiming illegal searches and privacy violations. They argued the marked ballot evidence showed I had tampered with the election. The prosecution countered with the overwhelming pattern of fraud, the financial self-dealing, and testimony from dozens of residents whose votes had been discarded. The defense's arguments crumbled under the weight of evidence. In April 2021, Patricia Henderson accepted a plea agreement. She pled guilty to 8 felony counts including election fraud, theft, and fraudulent schemes. In exchange for the plea, several lesser charges were dropped, but she was still facing significant prison time. Deborah Walsh and Gordon Steele took plea deals shortly after, each pleading to 4 felony counts. The sentencing hearing happened in June 2021. I attended with Rachel, sitting in the courtroom gallery as Judge Catherine Morrison reviewed the case. "Miss Henderson, you held a position of trust in your community," the judge said sternly. "For over a decade, you systematically defrauded your neighbors, stealing their money and their democratic rights. This wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment. This was calculated, persistent criminal conduct." Patricia stood silently, her expensive attorney beside her. "I sentence you to 4 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections, followed by 5 years of probation. You are ordered to pay restitution of $427,000 to the Saguaro Springs HOA. You are permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona." Patricia showed no emotion as the sentence was pronounced. She was led away by bailiffs, and I watched her disappear through a side door. Deborah Walsh received 2 years in prison plus probation and restitution. Gordon Steele got 18 months. All 3 were banned from HOA service permanently. Walking out of the courtroom, Rachel and I stood in the Phoenix sunshine, processing what had just happened. "It's over," Rachel said. "It's finally over." "Yeah," I replied, feeling the weight of 7 years lifting slowly. "It's over." The aftermath brought significant changes to Saguaro Springs. The state investigation prompted the Arizona legislature to pass new HOA governance laws in 2022, mandating independent election oversight, financial transparency requirements, and stronger penalties for board member misconduct. The Saguaro Springs Act, as it became known informally, set new standards for HOA accountability across Arizona. Our community recovered gradually. Property values, which had stagnated during Patricia's tenure, began rising again as word spread about our reformed governance. The reserve fund was replenished through restitution payments and special assessments. Marcus Johnson served as board president for 4 years, establishing systems and processes that prevented future corruption. I was invited to speak at HOA conferences and community meetings across Arizona, sharing my story and encouraging other residents to hold their boards accountable. I never sought this role, but I accepted it as a responsibility. If my experience could help other communities avoid similar corruption, the 7 years of documentation and frustration would have broader purpose. The media attention was intense for several months. The Arizona Republic ran a 3-part investigative series about HOA fraud, using Saguaro Springs as the centerpiece. National news outlets picked up the story. I was interviewed by CNN, NPR, and several HOA reform organizations. Amanda Chen, the reporter I'd first contacted back in 2016, wrote the definitive account of the case for the Republic. Her article won a regional journalism award and helped spark legislative action. "You were right to keep documenting," she told me over coffee after Patricia's sentencing. "Most people would have given up after the first year. Your persistence made the difference." Looking back on those 7 years, I sometimes wonder if I was crazy to invest so much time and energy in an HOA dispute. Rachel and I could have simply moved, found a different community without corrupt leadership. Many of our neighbors had suggested exactly that during the darkest periods. But staying and fighting mattered. It mattered because democracy, even at the level of a homeowners association, is worth protecting. It mattered because corruption unchallenged only grows worse. It mattered because people in positions of trust must face consequences when they betray that trust. The recordings, photographs, spreadsheets, and documents I compiled over those years filled dozens of folders on my computer and in file boxes in our garage. That evidence became the foundation for prosecution and reform. Without it, Patricia Henderson would likely still be running Saguaro Springs today, rigging elections and stealing money. I think about the residents who tried to challenge Patricia before me, Mark Chen, Susan Moore, Robert Davidson, and others. They knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it. They fought and lost and gave up. I was simply the one stubborn enough to keep going. In 2023, Saguaro Springs held an election under our new transparent system. Voter turnout was 73%, the highest in community history. Multiple qualified candidates ran for open seats. The counting was conducted by an independent election company, with results verified by multiple observers and posted online within hours. Rachel and I watched the count on our laptop from our living room, and I felt something I hadn't felt about HOA elections in years: simple civic satisfaction. The system was working as designed. Democracy was functioning. "Are you going to run for the board?" Rachel asked, half joking. "God, no," I said immediately. "I've had enough HOA drama for one lifetime." She laughed, and we clinked our beer bottles together in a small celebration of normalcy. Patricia Henderson served 2.5 years of her 4-year sentence before being released to supervised probation in late 2023. I saw a news article about her release, showing a much older-looking woman leaving prison in civilian clothes. She declined to comment to reporters and disappeared from public view. Part of me felt satisfaction at her imprisonment, but mostly I just felt sad about the whole situation. She'd had power and authority, and she'd chosen to use it for personal enrichment and control, rather than community service. So many lives had been disrupted, residents who'd been silenced, money that had been stolen, trust that had been violated. The restitution payments trickled in slowly over several years. Patricia was ordered to pay back her portion of the stolen funds, but her assets had been largely depleted by legal fees. The HOA recovered some money, but nowhere near the full amount stolen. The financial scars of her decade-long fraud would take years to fully heal. In 2024, I was invited to testify before the Arizona State Legislature about HOA reform legislation. I spoke to a joint committee about my experience and the need for stronger oversight of homeowner associations. HOAs govern millions of Americans, I told the assembled legislators. They have the power to fine residents, foreclose on homes, and control neighborhood aesthetics. Yet they operate with minimal oversight and accountability. What happened in Saguaro Springs could happen anywhere. We need laws that ensure transparency, protect democratic processes, and punish corruption. The committee listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions. Several legislators told me privately that they'd received similar complaints from constituents in their districts. HOA corruption was more widespread than most people realized. Arizona passed comprehensive HOA reform legislation in 2025, incorporating many recommendations from the Saguaro Springs case. Other states began examining their own HOA laws, using Arizona's reforms as a model. I never expected to become an accidental activist for HOA reform, but life takes unexpected turns. My experience taught me several important lessons about civic engagement and accountability. First, documentation matters. I couldn't have proven anything without 7 years of photographs, recordings, spreadsheets, and written records. In any dispute involving potential corruption or fraud, create a paper trail. Document everything. Second, persistence matters. I wanted to give up dozens of times over those 7 years. The process was frustrating, time-consuming, and often seemed futile. But continuing to push, even when progress seemed impossible, ultimately made the difference. Third, working within the system matters. I was tempted at various points to break into Patricia's storage unit or use other questionable methods to gather evidence. I'm glad I resisted those temptations. By working through legal channels, filing complaints, obtaining public records, documenting through legitimate observation, I ensured the evidence was admissible, and the prosecution was clean. Fourth, community matters. I couldn't have done this alone. Rachel's support kept me sane during the worst periods. Neighbors like Gary Chen, Marcus Johnson, and many others helped gather information and provided moral support. The reform movement was a collective effort, even though I became its public face. Finally, accountability matters. Patricia Henderson got away with election fraud and theft for over a decade because nobody held her accountable. When someone in authority abuses power, there must be consequences. Not for revenge, but to protect others and uphold the rule of law. Saguaro Springs today is a different community than it was in 2014. The physical infrastructure is the same, the desert landscaping, the pools, the tennis courts, but the governance culture has transformed completely. Board meetings are well-attended and productive. Elections are competitive and transparent. Financial reports are detailed and accessible. New residents moving into the community sometimes ask me about the Patricia Henderson case. I give them the abbreviated version, and they're invariably shocked that such corruption happened in a suburban Arizona HOA. It seems like something from a movie, not real life, but it was real. It happened here, and it's happening in HOA communities across America right now. Boards operating without oversight, elections conducted without transparency, money spent without accountability. Residents silenced when they ask questions. If you're reading this and you live in an HOA community, pay attention to your board. Attend meetings. Ask questions about finances. Observe elections. Don't assume everything is legitimate just because it's been done the same way for years. Patricia Henderson's fraud persisted for a decade because most residents assumed the system was working properly. If you notice irregularities, document them, keep records, take photographs. Save emails, record meetings if your state allows it, build a case methodically and carefully. Then take that evidence to authorities, the state attorney general, local prosecutors, the media, HOA reform organizations. Don't expect quick results. My case took 7 years from initial suspicions to final conviction. The process was exhausting and frustrating, but it was worth it. Rachel and I still live in Saguaro Springs. We considered moving after everything was resolved, but this is our home. We've built friendships here and we've invested in making this community better. Leaving would have felt like retreat. Our neighborhood has become a symbol of successful HOA reform, and I'm proud of that legacy. When I walk Max around the community these days, neighbors wave and sometimes thank me for what I did. That recognition is gratifying, but also somewhat uncomfortable. I was just a guy who refused to accept corruption. The most meaningful recognition came in 2024, when the Saguaro Springs Board named the community clubhouse the Martinez Community Center in honor of my efforts. They unveiled a plaque at a dedication ceremony, and I stood with Rachel as our neighbors applauded. "This didn't feel like courage at the time," I said in brief remarks. "It felt like stubbornness and frustration. But I'm grateful we live in a country where ordinary citizens can challenge corruption and win. Thank you all for supporting this fight." The applause was warm and several people hugged me afterward. Marcus Johnson shook my hand firmly. "You saved this community," he said. "Never doubt that." Maybe he was right. Or maybe I was just the right person at the right time with the right combination of stubbornness and documentation skills. Either way, Saguaro Springs is better today than it was under Patricia Henderson's corrupt regime. As I finish writing this account in early 2026, Patricia Henderson remains on probation somewhere in Arizona. Deborah Walsh and Gordon Steele have completed their sentences and also remain on probation. All three are permanently banned from HOA leadership. The $427,000 they stole has been partially recovered through restitution payments, asset seizures, and insurance claims. The community has rebuilt its reserve fund and stabilized its finances. New safeguards prevent any single person from controlling elections or finances the way Patricia once did. The broader impact of the case extends beyond Saguaro Springs. The legislative reforms enacted in Arizona have influenced other states. HOA governance has improved across the country as boards recognize the scrutiny they now face. The era of unchecked HOA corruption isn't over, but it's been dealt a significant blow. I'm often asked if I would do it all again, knowing how much time and energy it would consume. The honest answer is I don't know. Those 7 years were incredibly difficult. The stress affected my health, my marriage, and my career. There were times I was so consumed by HOA documentation that I neglected other important aspects of life. But I also know that doing nothing would have haunted me. Watching Patricia continue to steal and manipulate elections while I stayed silent would have been unbearable. I'm glad I fought, even though the cost was high. For anyone facing similar situations in their own communities, my advice is simple. Trust your instincts, document everything, work within the system, be persistent, and don't give up. Corruption thrives in darkness and silence. Shine light on it, speak about it, and eventually justice can prevail. The recordings I made, the photographs I took, and the spreadsheets I compiled over a decade weren't just evidence for prosecution. They were a record of democratic principles being violated and then restored. They proved that ordinary citizens have power to challenge corruption and win. That's the real lesson of Saguaro Springs. Not that our HOA was corrupt. Sadly, many are. The lesson is that corruption can be defeated when someone refuses to accept it. When someone documents the abuse, reports it to authorities, and persists through years of frustration. I recorded the HOA board rigging elections for a decade, and the state attorney general shut them down. That sentence summarizes years of work into one simple statement. But behind it lies thousands of hours of documentation, hundreds of photographs, dozens of recordings, and the unwavering support of a community that wanted better governance. Today, I serve on no HOA committees. I attend board meetings occasionally but mostly let others handle community governance. I've done my part, and now I'm content to be an ordinary resident again. Rachel and I enjoy our home, walk our dog, and live our lives without the constant stress of investigating corruption. But I keep all my documentation in secure storage, and I maintain contact with HOA reform organizations across the country. If another situation arises where my experience could help, I'll share what I learned. The fight for HOA accountability continues, and I'm ready to support it however I can. The sun sets beautifully over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that drew us to Scottsdale in the first place. Rachel and I sit on our back patio, watching the colors shift and change. This is home. This is what we fought for, not just a house, but a community governed fairly and democratically. Patricia Henderson tried to steal that from us. She tried to steal it from 300 families who trusted her with authority. For 10 years, she succeeded, but in the end, the truth emerged. Justice prevailed. Democracy was restored. That's the story I'll tell my future children someday, not as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson about civic responsibility. About paying attention to those in power. About refusing to accept corruption. About fighting for what's right even when the fight seems impossible. The battle for Saguaro Springs is over, but the war for HOA accountability continues across America. Somewhere right now, another Patricia Henderson is rigging another election, stealing another community's money, silencing another resident who dares to question her authority. I hope someone in that community is documenting everything, preparing to fight back. I hope they have the persistence to see it through, no matter how long it takes. And I hope they remember the lesson from Saguaro Springs. Corruption can be defeated, but only if someone refuses to give up. That someone was me in Saguaro Springs. That someone could be you in your community. Pay attention, document everything, fight back. The system works when we force it to work. And if you ever need advice or encouragement, remember this story. Remember that one stubborn resident in Arizona recorded a corrupt HOA board for 10 years and brought them down. If it could happen here, it could happen anywhere. That's my message to anyone facing HOA corruption. Don't give up. Your documentation matters, your persistence matters, your voice matters. Justice might take years to arrive, but it can arrive. The state attorney general shut down Patricia Henderson's criminal enterprise. But really, it was the 300 families of Saguaro Springs who shut her down by refusing to accept corruption as normal, by demanding better, by supporting investigation and prosecution. That's the power of community when it's properly informed and engaged. That's what democracy looks like when it actually functions. And that's what I fought for across those 7 years of documentation and frustration. Was it worth it? Standing on my patio tonight, looking at the peaceful community around me, knowing that elections here are now fair and finances are transparent, yes, it was worth it. Every photograph, every recording, every frustrating meeting, every moment of doubt. It was worth it because corruption lost and democracy won. It was worth it because 300 families now have the leadership they deserve. It was worth it because other communities learned from our experience and improved their own governance. Most importantly, it was worth it because it proved that ordinary citizens still have power in America. We're not helpless against corruption. We're not powerless against those who abuse authority. We can fight back and we can win. That's the real story of how I recorded the HOA board rigging elections for a decade and the state attorney general shut them down. Not a story of heroism or exceptional courage, but a story of stubbornness, documentation, and refusing to give up. If you take nothing else from this account, take this. Pay attention to those who govern you, even at the level of a homeowners association. Hold them accountable. Question their decisions. Demand transparency. And if you discover corruption, document it and fight it with every tool the system provides. Democracy only works when we defend it. Even in the smallest contexts, like a suburban Arizona HOA, that defense matters. It mattered in Saguaro Springs, and it matters in your community too. The fight continues. The battle for accountability goes on. But tonight, in this moment, I'm just grateful for peace, for justice served, and for a community restored to democratic principles. That's enough. That's everything. That's why I spent a decade recording corruption and why I do it again if necessary. Because in the end, truth matters, justice matters, and democracy, even at the HOA level, is worth fighting for.